Old sister, the company needs to grow beyond your limited capabilities. Dylan smirked as he passed the termination documents across the mahogany desk. It's time to create space for genuine innovation. With firm hands, I took up the document, retaining the neutral expression that had been ingrained in me after 15 years of working in corporate politics. I briefly made eye contact with my younger brother. His victorious smile stood in stark contrast to the elegantly framed family portraits behind him, relics of a purportedly devoted past. At 44, I was Vanessa King, and I had dedicated a third of my life to creating and overseeing the in-house software system that drove Kingline Ventures, our family's Pittsburgh-based logistics and inventory company. Not only was I the IT lead, I had started from the beginning, creating thousands of lines of code to build a framework that monitored vendors across 3 continents, controlled shipments in real time, and automated billing. Do you really want to begin your term as managing director in this manner? I inquired, aligning the edges of the termination papers by knocking them on the table. Making drastic changes in just 1 week in the big office? Dylan reclined in our father's chair, which still had the feel of our father's dominant presence even after it had been reupholstered twice. Dylan, however, had always acted impulsively and egotistically, in contrast to our father, whose choices were moderated by experience and thought. With his silk tie adjusted, he said, "The board agrees we need fresh perspectives. They have given their approval for Vortex Solutions to redesign our digital infrastructure. Everything will be modernized by their staff. Cloud integration, machine learning, etc. While you have kept us bound to your created system, I have been arguing for these things for years." When he muttered, "handmade," I nearly burst out laughing, as if I had been knitting scarves rather than creating an integrated logistics system that had saved the firm millions of dollars and exceeded all commercial alternatives. I didn't correct him, though. I didn't. Assuming that my art would speak for itself was maybe my worst error over the years. Dylan went on, "You have 2 weeks of severance. Everything has already been handled by human resources. To finish off any loose ends, your credentials will be active until tomorrow at the latest." My brother was already glancing behind me at his computer screen as I got up from my chair, going on. I smiled a little, but he didn't see it, one of comprehension rather than acceptance. It would soon become painfully clear that Dylan had never tried to understand what I truly performed at Kingline Ventures. It wasn't easy growing up as the Pittsburgh Kings. From a 2-truck business, our father, Edward King, transformed Kingline Ventures into a regional powerhouse that managed logistics for firms throughout the Rust Belt. In the realm of elite schools and country club memberships, we resided in a huge Victorian home in Shadyside. Dylan was good at athletics and wooing people at business dinners, but I was more interested in maths and computers. When I was 12, my father purchased my first computer because he could see I had an analytical mind. I began developing simple inventory tracking software at the age of 16. When I graduated with my computer science degree, he didn't hesitate to bring me into the family business. "One day the world will run on information more than steel," he told me, displaying a rare prescience for someone who'd built his fortune on physical infrastructure. "You'll help us stay ahead of that curve." My first major contribution came when our existing logistics software, an expensive third-party solution, failed during a major client onboarding. Working through 3 sleepless nights, I developed a stopgap measure that not only salvaged the client relationship, but proved more efficient than the original system. That was when Dad gave me the green light to develop a complete proprietary system. "Build something just for us," he said. "Something that fits exactly how we work." Over the next decade, I did exactly that, layering in specialized modules, custom-designed APIs, and lightning-fast routing algorithms that accommodated our growing business. The system became our competitive edge, allowing us to undercut competitors while maintaining higher profit margins. But as my system became indispensable, my role as its creator was increasingly taken for granted. Dylan, meanwhile, returned from business school with grand theories about disruption and digital transformation. He dismissed my work during board meetings, calling it legacy technology, while proposing partnerships with flashy tech startups. Our father always mediated, understanding that Dylan's vision had merit, but appreciating the reliability of what I'd built. "Your brother sees the future," Dad would tell me during our regular coffee meetings. "But you've built our present. Both matter." Then came Dad's unexpected retirement announcement, accelerated by minor heart issues. The board's choice of Dylan for managing director stung, but didn't surprise me. He had the charisma and connections that I lacked, plus a vision that sounded exciting to members who didn't understand the technical complexities involved. What did surprise me was how quickly he moved to dismantle what I'd built. The termination papers in my hands represented more than personal rejection. They signaled a fundamental misunderstanding of how deeply my code was woven into the company's operations. I cleared my desk methodically that afternoon, packing away 15 years of professional life into a single cardboard box. The few personal items, a potted succulent, framed photos of hiking trips, a small collection of tech conference lanyards, seemed inadequate representations of my time at Kingline. Jennifer from Human Resources hovered awkwardly nearby, tasked with ensuring I didn't steal company property or sabotage anything on my way out. She was new, barely 6 months with the company, and clearly uncomfortable with evicting someone who had occupied this office longer than most employees had been with the firm. "I'm really sorry about this, Vanessa," she said in a hushed tone. "Everyone in IT is shocked." "It's business," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't. It was personal, the culmination of a sibling rivalry that had finally found its resolution. I glanced at my computer screen one last time. Open on it was the dashboard for the Kingline Integrated System, KISS, as the team called it. The interface was deceptively simple, showing real-time status of hundreds of shipments, color-coded inventory levels across warehouses, and financial projections updated to the minute. What wasn't visible was the complexity beneath, the custom architecture I'd built, maintained, and continuously improved for years. I had 24 hours before my credentials were revoked. 24 hours to decide what to do with the knowledge in my head that wasn't documented anywhere else. "Protocol says I need to ask for your master password override," Jennifer said, reading from her offboarding checklist. I smiled slightly. "It's in the system documentation. Dylan has access to all that now." This wasn't entirely true. While basic documentation existed, the deeper architecture, the shortcuts, the workarounds, the contingency protocols, those lived only in my mind and in secured notes that weren't part of the official documentation. Not out of malice or job security fears, but because complex systems evolve organically, and documentation always lags behind reality. As I walked toward the elevator carrying my small box of belongings, I passed the glass-walled conference room where Dylan was meeting with representatives from Vortex Solutions. Through the glass, I could see him gesturing enthusiastically, while a team of consultants nodded along, their sleek presentation displayed on the wall screen. One slide caught my eye: seamless migration from legacy systems. I almost stopped to tell them there was nothing seamless about integrating with KISS, that the system was deliberately designed with security layers that required specific knowledge to navigate. I almost warned them about the cascading dependencies that could trigger catastrophic failures if modified incorrectly. Almost. Instead, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. I hadn't built back doors or booby traps into the system. I'd always been too professional for that. I didn't need to sabotage anything. The system itself, with all its complexity and customization, would do that for me if mishandled. As the elevator doors closed, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 days passed in a strange, unfamiliar calm. Without the constant ping of crisis emails and the pressure of system maintenance, I found myself with time I hadn't experienced since college. I slept past 6 a.m., went for morning runs along the Monongahela River, and actually sat down for breakfast instead of gulping coffee on the way to the office. On the third morning after my termination, I was enjoying a leisurely coffee on my balcony when my personal phone vibrated. Caitlin Joe's name flashed on the screen, head of client services at King Line, and one of the few colleagues I considered a friend. Vanessa, her voice carried an unmistakable edge of panic. Are you watching this? Watching what? The Westbridge presentation. Dylan's doing it live on the company feed for all departments to see. He's about to, she broke off, and I heard commotion in the background. Oh God, it's happening again. I pulled up the company's internal live stream on my tablet, using the credentials that apparently hadn't been deactivated yet. The video showed our largest conference room, where Dylan stood before executives from Westbridge Manufacturing, a potential client worth at least $15 million annually. He was mid-sentence, gesturing toward the large display behind him that showcased the KISS dashboard, which allows us to guarantee 99.8% on-time delivery and complete transparency across your supply chain, he was saying confidently. Then it happened. The dashboard behind him flickered, displaying a cascade of error messages before freezing completely. Dylan continued speaking for several seconds before realizing something was wrong. He glanced back, his professional smile faltering. Just a momentary glitch, he said, tapping frantically at his tablet. Let me just refresh the... But the system didn't refresh. Instead, a critical error message appeared. Database integrity compromised. System lockdown initiated. I knew exactly what had happened. The KISS had a self-protection protocol I'd implemented years ago after a corrupted update nearly destroyed our shipping data. When it detected potential data corruption, it would automatically lock down to prevent catastrophic loss. Restarting required a specific sequence of commands and administrator verification, a procedure only I had performed until now. Dylan was still trying to recover, his confident demeanor crumbling. Our technical team will have this resolved momentarily, he assured the increasingly skeptical-looking Westbridge executives. My phone began lighting up with texts and calls from IT staff, from operations managers, and finally from Dylan himself. I silenced it and continued watching the disaster unfold. Within minutes, reports began flooding the emergency channel in the company's messaging system. Warehouse terminals offline. Shipping labels unable to generate. Billing system frozen. The entire operation had ground to a halt. A sick satisfaction settled in my stomach, followed immediately by guilt. These were still my colleagues, struggling through no fault of their own. The clients being affected had done nothing wrong. Only Dylan deserved this humiliation. My phone rang again, this time displaying Edward King, my father. I hesitated before answering. Vanessa. His voice carried none of its usual commanding presence. Instead, he sounded tired. Worried. The system's down. I know, I replied. I'm watching it happen. Dylan says it's a systematic failure. That your architecture was fundamentally flawed and finally collapsed. I laughed bitterly. Of course, he'd say that. The system isn't flawed. It's protecting itself from whatever they're trying to do to it. A long silence stretched between us before my father spoke again. Can you fix it? The question hung in the air. Could I? Certainly. Would I? That was more complicated. I don't work for King Line anymore, Dad, I finally said. Dylan made that very clear. My father sighed heavily through the phone. This isn't just about you and Dylan, Vanessa. There are 300 employees whose jobs depend on getting things running again, not to mention our clients. The guilt I'd felt earlier intensified. He was right. My satisfaction at Dylan's predicament came at the expense of many innocent people. But the wounded part of me, the part that had been dismissed and discarded after 15 years of dedication, wasn't ready to concede. Dylan should have thought about that before firing the only person who fully understands the system, I replied. Besides, he has Vortex Solutions now. Aren't they supposed to be modernizing everything? Vanessa, my father started, but I interrupted him. I'm sorry, Dad. I have a job interview in an hour. I have to go. This wasn't entirely a lie. I did have an interview scheduled that morning with Caraval Logistics, a mid-sized competitor that had reached out almost immediately after word of my departure from King Line spread through the industry. Their CTO had been trying to poach me for years. As I dressed for the interview, I couldn't help checking the King Line emergency channel again. The situation was deteriorating. Regional managers were reporting that trucks were idle, drivers were waiting for instructions, and warehouses couldn't process incoming or outgoing shipments. Conservative estimates put the cost of the outage at $50,000 per hour and climbing. My interview with Caraval went exceptionally well. Their technical team asked intelligent questions about system architecture and showed genuine interest in my approach to logistics software. The CTO, Lawrence Bennett, didn't hide his excitement at the prospect of having me build something for them. "We've been trapped in vendor solutions for too long," he explained as he walked me out. "Having someone in-house who could create something tailored to our needs would be revolutionary." "Someone like me, you mean?" I said with a smile. "Exactly like you." He handed me a folder. "This is our offer. It's aggressive. We want you to know how serious we are. Take a few days to think about it." Back in my car, I opened the folder and nearly gasped. The compensation package was almost double what I'd been making at King Line, with substantial equity and the title of Chief Technology Officer. It was everything I deserved, but had never received at the family company. My phone was still blowing up with messages from King Line. I scrolled through them briefly, Dylan demanding I answer his calls, the IT team begging for access codes, even board members reaching out directly. The last message caught my eye. From Caitlin. "Westbridge walked. Dylan is blaming you publicly, saying you sabotaged the system before leaving. Board emergency meeting in progress. Please call me." I felt a surge of anger. Sabotage? I'd spent 15 years building and protecting that system. Its current failure was simple. The Vortex team had likely tried to force integration without understanding the security protocols, triggering the lockdown sequence. Before I could think better of it, I called Dylan. He answered immediately. "Thank God. You need to fix this right now, Vanessa. This is corporate sabotage, and I'm prepared to take legal action." "Stop." I cut him off. "I didn't sabotage anything. Your fancy consultants triggered a security protocol by trying to force access. If you'd bothered to ask me for a proper handover instead of ambushing me with termination papers, I could have explained how the system works." "Then fix it," he demanded. "No, that's not how this works, Dylan. I'm not your employee anymore. Remember? You made that abundantly clear." There was a moment of stunned silence before he spoke again, his voice suddenly conciliatory. "What do you want? To come back? Fine, you can have your job back." I couldn't help but laugh. "My job back? After you humiliated me and questioned my capabilities? I don't think so." By evening, the situation at King Line had reached crisis level. Through Caitlin, I learned that the board had called an emergency session where Dylan was struggling to explain both the system failure and his decision to terminate me without a transition plan. The Vortex Solutions team had admitted they couldn't access the core system architecture without proper documentation that didn't exist in the official repositories. I sat in my living room, nursing a glass of wine and weighing my options. The Caraval offer was tempting. A clean break. A fresh start. Recognition I'd never received at King Line. But 15 years of my life were embedded in the kiss. Watching it fall apart felt like watching a part of myself being dismantled. My doorbell rang at 9 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw Dylan standing there, looking disheveled, his normally immaculate hair mussed, his designer suit wrinkled. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door. "You win, okay," he said before I could speak. "I was wrong. We need you. I need you." I leaned against the doorframe, studying my younger brother. At 40, Dylan still carried himself with the entitled confidence of the golden child, the son who had followed perfectly in our father's footsteps, while I carved my own technical path. But now, for perhaps the first time, I saw genuine desperation in his eyes. The board is furious, he continued when I didn't respond. They're talking about emergency leadership changes. Dad is disappointed. Everyone's blaming me. As they should, I replied calmly. You fired the architect of the system that runs the entire company without ensuring knowledge transfer. That's not just bad business. It's negligent leadership. He flinched but didn't argue. Tell me what you want. Name your price to fix this. I stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. In my living room, I pulled out my laptop and brought up the Caravel offer letter. Caravel wants me to build them exactly what I built for Kingline, I said, turning the screen toward him. This is what they think I'm worth. Dylan's eyes widened as he saw the compensation package. This is outrageous. They're just trying to steal our technology through you. No, Dylan. They're recognizing my value, something Kingline never did. I closed the laptop. I don't want to be just an IT manager anymore. I want my role to reflect what I actually contribute. What are you saying? I want a board seat, the title of Chief Technology Officer, equal compensation to yours, and complete autonomy over the technical division. I met his gaze steadily. Those are my terms. Dylan laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. The board would never. Then enjoy explaining to them how you plan to rebuild 15 years of proprietary development from scratch, I interrupted. I'm sure the shareholders will understand when the stock plummets. A tense silence filled the room as my brother processed the situation. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing his pride against the immediate crisis and his longer-term prospects if Kingline suffered a prolonged outage. The board meets again tomorrow morning, he finally said. I'll present your terms, but I can't guarantee they'll accept everything. That's fine, I replied. But I won't step foot in the office or touch a line of code until they do. The system will remain down until then. After Dylan left, I poured myself another glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. The Pittsburgh skyline glittered against the night sky, and for the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my destiny. Whether I returned to Kingline on my terms or accepted Caravel's offer, one thing was certain: I would never again allow my contributions to be minimized or taken for granted. The next morning, I walked into Kingline's headquarters wearing a tailored power suit I'd purchased but rarely worn. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me, and whispers followed as I crossed the lobby. Word of my return had clearly spread. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes tracked me as I took my seat at the table, not in my usual chair against the wall as an invited technical advisor, but in a proper leather chair between my father and Josephine Winters, our longest-serving board member. Dylan stood at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged years overnight. Behind him, a projection displayed the ongoing system outage metrics: 27 hours of downtime, estimated losses approaching $1.4 million, 42 delayed shipments, and 17 angry client escalations. Miss King has agreed to address our technical situation, Dylan announced, his voice carefully controlled. The board has reviewed and accepted her conditions for return. I noted the formal Miss King rather than my sister or Vanessa, a small but telling choice that distanced him from the decision. While some board members gave me grateful nods, others regarded me suspiciously, maybe questioning whether I had intentionally sparked the situation. I opened my laptop and stated, I want to be clear about what happened before we move forward. Poor design or sabotage were not the cause of the system breakdown. I put in place this security measure years ago to guard against data corruption. The system performed precisely what it was designed to do: protect itself, when it was activated by efforts at unauthorized access. None of them had ever seen the KAIS master interface before, so I projected my screen onto the screen. A sophisticated mesh of security procedures, override methods, and system health indicators lay behind the slick user display. I clarified, the real core of Kingline's competitive advantage is what you're seeing. A proprietary system that has undergone 15 years of optimization and customization. It cannot be easily replaced by a hasty relocation or an off-the-shelf solution. Suddenly realizing the worth of what I had created, the board members leaned forward. Finally, even Dylan seems to realize that my limited capabilities had produced something extraordinary. I started working on repairing King Line systems after receiving unanimous board approval for my return, along with my new position, pay, and board seat. Although I purposefully guided the IT staff through every step to ensure knowledge transfer that ought to have occurred years ago, the process took less than an hour. There was a noticeable sense of relief when systems throughout the organization went back online. There were a lot of happy messages on the messaging channels. Finally, truckers received their route instructions, and warehouse management reported that activities had resumed. A harsh lesson in technological debt and appropriate succession planning, the financial impact was significant but manageable. Much changed in the next week. Dylan's office was moved to the executive floor next to me. Under my direct direction, the IT department was restructured with the goal of adequately documenting the system and educating several team members on its design. Most gratifyingly, the contract with Vortex Solutions was renegotiated, moving from a complete replacement to a cooperative upgrade initiative that worked with my team instead of replacing us. Dylan kept a professional distance, limiting our conversations to those that were absolutely essential. I discovered that I didn't mind that the sibling connection was still broken. Especially in a business setting, respect was more important than familial affection. My father was the one who made the most change. He finally recognized what he had been missing for years at our first weekly coffee date after I returned. He said, "I always assumed Dylan would lead King because he reminds me of myself. However, you are the one who has actually innovated and created something from nothing. I should have seen that sooner." Although it felt nice to be validated, I knew that it was no longer required. I had unquestionably shown my value to the board, our staff, and most significantly, to myself, during the crisis. That Friday, my new business cards came. Vanessa King, board member and chief technology officer. I felt a great sense of satisfaction when I looked at them, and it had nothing to do with seeking retribution, but rather with at last getting the credit I deserved. I thought about how wonderful success felt when it came from sticking to your principles rather than putting others down when the dust settled and everything resumed as usual. Nothing had needed to be sabotaged by me. All I needed to do was wait for the gap I created to open up and show its actual size.